I run the QCA, the Quoted Companies Alliance. We're very pleased to represent mid-cap and small-cap stocks with government, with regulators, and with media. So we get a sense of what we think these companies can offer the future of the UK economy. I'm delighted to be with three great speakers and experts this morning. First of all, Bill Fawkner-Corbett, who's head of SIGnet, the investment club network, part of ShareSoc. Joanne Hart from the Mail on Sunday is an investment writer many of you will know. The investment column is Midas. And finally, Gervais Williams from Premier Miton, legendary small cap investor and also president of the QCA currently. So let me start off. The exam question is, why are small caps key to the UK's future economy? And I would say, first of all, we should consider, never mind the future, what about the present? A huge part of today's economy are small cap stocks. 91% of all quoted companies. They're contributing £25 billion in tax every year, and they also constitute 2.1 million workers. But Joanne, let me come to you first of all. What do you think the small caps of today mean for the UK's future economy?
That's a very big question.
Well, let's go in bin.
I mean, I think, obviously, as you say, they are the main driver of growth in this economy, or they should be, because every large company starts out as a small company. So I don't think you could even question whether small caps are the engine for the future. I think it's more about how do you fuel that growth? How do you actually encourage small caps to become the giants of tomorrow? And we've not been very good at that here. The States have been much better traditionally. But with everything that's going on across the other side of the Atlantic, this could be our moment. I'm thinking it could be our moment. And in fact, I'm writing a column tomorrow which explores that in a little bit more detail. And I think one of the things that we need to look at is how undervalued UK small caps are today, and why. Everyone's taking money out of the UK stock market, including lots of people here, presumably. There have been billions and billions, 9 years of outflows. So perhaps it's time now to start getting some inflows into our unloved small companies.
Yeah. Thank you. Bill, what would you say to start with? You've been investing for a long time. What is it about the small caps today that we really should, the reason we should be nurturing them?
I mean, I think growth is the is the standard answer, but on top of that, and as part of that, is innovation. I mean, everything we have today, the human race has innovated for how many thousands of years, and that's ever accelerating. And by and large, that a large extent, that comes from small companies. Somebody having a bright idea, inventing something, developing something. I think that would be my second word.
Yes,
Innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. Gervais, what about you?
Well, I would say, I mean, there's the long-term arguments, which both we've covered here, but actually I think there's really important short-term arguments right now. And I think we're moving from a period of globalization to protectionism to nationalism, and I think that's going to lead much less growth. So I don't think you're going to get growth in the major companies in the way we did. I think there's going to be lots of other things to worry about. The cost of trade tariffs, we don't know how much they're going to be. I think back in the 30s when we introduced tariffs, we had an awful lot of commodity cartels. I think there's commodity cartels. And on top of that, we're going to have export bans as well. So the bottom line is, I think uncertainty is extraordinarily wide from here. Geopolitical risk, unintended consequences of policy, open-ended military risks, all that stuff. I think most markets will flatline from here. My working assumption is that most global stock markets flatline from here. And the only way, actually, you're going to be able to make a proper return is to get away from the bigness to smallness. So actually, the great advantage isn't just that they're small. They can move into vacated markets when companies go bust. They can move into insolvent companies and expand their earnings growth. But most particularly, I think the UK is the world leader in small caps. A lot of small cap funds invest in £5 billion company a year and £10 trillion company there. I'm talking about £100 million companies and £500 million companies. Small cap effect, they will be the best performing part in the world.
Yeah. And we know from our stats, that there's if you catch those companies at the right time, there is that potential to do great things for the economy and explosive growth. I mean, stats that we use a lot with government. We know that small caps are 50 on AIM in particular, and I guess this will also relate to Equities, 50% more productive per employee than the UK average. So there is, and that's kind of a bit hidden away, Gervais. But
Well, I mean, I think ultimately the whole point about small caps is they drive productivity improvement. If you look at the UK economy in the last 20 years, hardly any productivity improvement. That's globalization. The side effect, the compromise we get with globalization is lack of productivity improvement. Same with the US, around the world. We need productivity improvement. Unfortunately, the zombies need to go bust, but that means that the younger businesses, the vibrant businesses, can move in with productivity improvement.
Yes, yeah. And Joanne, I mean, we also track that. We see that growth spurt quite soon after companies IPO when they do get to market. Obviously, this is another not particularly classic year for IPOs. But when companies do come to market, when there is that support in the first 12 months, there's potentially a lot of investment, a lot of hiring. We find that the workforce can go up by about 25% in the first year or so after IPO.
Yes, these employment numbers can go up, but unfortunately, quite often the share price movement is much less than it should be. I mean, I've actually...
You've got to write about them.
I do. There's a company, Hercules Site Services. I don't know whether you've ever come across it. They provide some really clever tech to bridge, to get local employees and local employers on infrastructure projects. Fantastic company run by an incredibly dynamic Turkish man. Shares have barely moved since they IPO'd. He's doing everything right. I look at so many companies like that, and it's really frustrating.
Well, they are doing everything right because actually Hercules, and we didn't set this up before. They've just joined the QCA, so they're doing everything right. They're doing everything right.
Didn't set this up before.
Bill, what more can you say about where these companies are and how they're supporting UK economy? And we know that they're very regional. These public companies will be everywhere. We know that there's a small quota company in every English county bar Herefordshire, and that's got to be very important for the future economy for all.
Yeah. I mean, I think one characteristic which I think you say they take off after an IPO. I think, one of the things we find is that some of them might do nothing up for 10 years and then they suddenly take off. And so you have to catch the right moment, I think, to do well out of them. And that's very hard. But I mean, one of the things we do, as well as having a network of investor groups, we organize visits to companies. And we were visiting a company on Wednesday. And I think it's been quoted for about 10 years. Revenue growth over the past 5 years, 50%, something like that. And it's only recently taken off.
Is it possible to say who that was?
Yeah. Transcends Technologies.
Ah, right, okay.
Are they a member?
You're asking me now.
They should be.
I think, yes, I'll say I think they are, yes. Yeah. Okay, and what do you get out of a trip like that? I guess you're seeing, you're kicking the tires and you can see how they're plugged in with their local economy. Yeah,
yes, but in this case, I mean, they're an international company. And they're selling to GE Aerospace.
Yeah.
So, and they've got partners in the US. So, they can be small and local, but international as well.
Yes, yeah. Gervais, I suppose, a healthy population of small caps says quite a lot about a healthy national economy, that we should be able to bring these on.
Yeah, I mean, as I sort of talked about earlier, I think we're in for a period of unsettled economics. And the great advantage of difference is that whilst unfortunately some will fail, and some big companies will fail, but so will some small caps, some won't just survive, they'll thrive. And the opportunity for them, the nature of small cap investment isn't that you make 30 or 50%. Lovely, fantastic to enhance your return that way. But sometimes when a company gets going, it makes 3, 5, 10. I've got a stock which is up 25 times over the last 5 years against the tide of small caps going down. And it's still cheap, having gone up 25 times, kind of crazy. The risk-reward ratio is beautiful. We've got to make sure the companies which actually have the ability to actually allocate capital, get the capital and allocate it, create that employment, create that extra tax take. which is obviously the way the UK quota companies should be supported.
Yeah. And you've talked about this a little bit, but Joanne, I mean, it's I suppose from the UK's point of view, it's about not exporting so much of our capital, making sure our capital, stays at home and gets behind these companies with that great potential.
Absolutely. I mean, I think some of the ideas about trying to force people to put money in the UK it's a little bit of a stretch. But on the other hand, if there were better incentives, for instance, removing stamp duty, I think that would be really helpful to try and galvanise UK investment in UK businesses and understand how amazing some of them are.
Yeah. And that capital bill, it's sometimes the private investors lead the way, I think, don't they? They're getting in at the ground floor with with these great companies before and Gervais is nodding. So before these institutions have really had time to get to grips with the business model.
Yeah. And sometimes it's the institutions coming in that start to give the value, isn't it?
Well, and the funny thing is, a lot of the companies we buy are literally too cheap. They're literally too cheap for most of the institutions to buy. Either the share price has gone so low that they're below the threshold which they look at, and they are literally too inexpensive. The valuations are too low, and it's only when they triple or quadruple that they move back into the investment universe, when all the institutions think, my goodness, this is a good company. It's already gone up 4 times. It's a pleasure to be investing in small caps.
And I think that's the second part of the exam question. Why do we think small caps are a wonderful investment? It is that joy of spotting something, as you say, Gervais. I mean, it's too cheap, and you get it before anybody else does.
That's absolutely right. I mean, if we assume that I'm half right about the future, and most stock market indices flatline for 20 years, which is my working basis, then you need something which is going to add value. Small caps will outperform, as they usually do, small cap effect. But if you can get a bit of extra return on top by selecting those companies which aren't just successful, going to be thriving in this very uncertain world, then of course you can make out like a complete bandit. That's what we're interested in, really.
Yeah, and it's notable that quite often we're talking to smaller companies. I mean, the first institution on the share register will be Premier Miton.
That's right. I hope obviously we don't always get there first, but others they. But actually, I also would push back a little bit on this growth and innovation thing. Don't get me wrong, I think we should have growth and I think we should have innovation, but I'm very happy to have a wide range of companies. We have quite a lot of energy companies, and just occasionally, as with Ukraine, we saw most of my portfolio holdings went down, but my energy stocks went up. Diversification is important. I think mining companies, again, I think we're going to get these tariffs coming in, but I think we're going to get all sorts of commodity cartels, and therefore I think some of these mining companies are going to be very important. Again, some of the financials, they're a bit complicated, but some of the small financials are absurdly cheap. Most financials are cheap, actually, but some of the small caps are kind of crazily cheap.
Yeah.
And so you've got to have within your portfolio, I would argue you'd have to have the full range of companies rather than just the kind of growth stock.
Yeah. Joanne, very interested in following your column over a number of years. I mean, you have always found space for the smaller companies. And it would be so easy to say, I'm going to do M&S twice a year or something. So I think it'd be really interesting to hear what gets you excited, because actually writing even a short column on a small cap probably takes a lot more work. You've got to go hunting. You've got to. Am I right?
Yes, I think you are. But I think what excites me is, or why I do it, is partly because I truly believe that these companies need support, if they're good ones, obviously not everyone, but and also because the stories are amazing. I mean, you get the passion. I don't know whether anybody followed Applied Nutrition's IPO late last year, but the guy who runs it, Thomas Ryder, started in a garage or something like that. He's so passionate. A lot of these the CEOs of these smaller companies really, they live and breathe their businesses, and they're doing amazing things. There's lots of wonderful, I mean, I agree with you, a diversified portfolio is absolutely essential. But some of the technology that our smaller companies are creating, just amazing, and being exported and being used in, I was talking to a company that's, their software is actually embedded in lots of US departments. It's supposed to encourage security. Obviously, they have to use it rather than Signal. But I mean, there's some amazing companies, and it's just exciting to spend time with them.
Because even though, we know there are fewer quota companies than there were and there should be, but even among that community, well, we know from the membership, I mean, there are still amazing breakthrough technologies.
Yeah.
And always something to discover.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Bill, what gets you excited when you're...
I mean, I think the other two things that are important for a retail investor, I think generally, not always, but generally, smaller companies are easier to understand. The business
You think
model,
so? Okay.
Yeah. The business model it hasn't got complicated yet. Sometimes the technology might be a bit complicated, but you can get your head around it much easier than, I don't know, a bank or something like that. And the second thing is that, and again, it's not always the case, but often management are much more willing to engage.
Yeah.
And it's not as difficult to get the finance director on the phone, or ask him a few questions, to get a visit, to go and see them. So those are two other.
Well, I'm sure they all take your calls by now, Bill. Yeah. In terms of this that you talk about diversification and variety, Gervais, it's really big focus of this government is industrial strategy, and we've had a sense of this already. They've talked about 8 different categories of companies that they're really focused on, which is pretty broad, and it covers most things, not hospitality, not retail. I wonder how valuable you think that steer is, if that's kind of meant to be the roadmap for the future of the UK economy.
Yeah, I mean, we really had a government, not just this government, but governments which have been asleep really for 30 years. And we've been exporting all our capital to the US principally, but other places. And actually, we just need to bring it home. And we need the support of government to do so. And industrial strategy is one of those supports.
Yep.
But specifically, I think we're going to find that it's going to be a big pattern change. And so many of the sectors which have done so well for the last 30 years, business services, certain technology areas, all of that kind of thing, I think they'll have a much more unsettled time. If you've got all this world broken up with different nationalities, maybe you can't sell your technology in all these different countries because there'll be export bans or extra taxes and things. So I think it'll be much more manufacturing-led. How awful is that? Manufacturing back in the UK. Again, I think we're going to see quite a lot of interest in security of supply again, mining. I think quite a lot of sort of metals come from Africa and things, but I think we're going to have local, all sorts of areas which are more certain of supply. So I think the whole world is going to radically change. So the opportunity for picking those stocks, getting in early on what might be a long-term trend of 20, 30 years. I've got a chart here which shows, how the UK outperforms. I expect the UK to outperform the US stock market, as it has over the last, couple of months, 3 months.
Yep.
And I think that's just the start. We haven't seen the small caps come. Not a problem. They can come in a few months' time. And the risk-reward ratio is actually, therefore, will bring our stock capital home. I say, bring UK capital for UK jobs. I don't think even the government's going to push back against that.
No, I don't think so. And over what time frame is that outperformance then? How long does that...
Are we going back to 1960?
Is this a golden era we're going into?
Yeah, I mean, it was between 65 and 85. The FTSE All-Share didn't just keep up with the S&P 500. It outperformed at an even faster rate than the S&P's outperformed over the last 30 years.
Yeah.
So it's incredible. And that's because companies generating surplus cash survive. Not only that, as companies go bust, they expand into the vacated markets. And like HSBC buying SVB UK, you buy a company from the receiver for £1. In that case, they probably added 5 billion to their market cap.
Yeah.
Great for HSBC, 160 billion.
Yeah.
But actually, small caps get more uplift.
Yeah, and I think one of the things the government wants, which is really, really important and really relevant to today, is they want to see greater retail participation in UK capital markets.
Absolutely.
And I really hope that there is someone in the building, a government representative, that actually is seeing today it can work and how it can work more, get some tips on broadening that participation.
Yeah.
I think it's time to hand over some questions now, but thank you, Gervais, Joanne and Bill.